No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about failure.
Sure, let's do it, man. I'm always down to talk a little bit about failure.
I wanted to enlist the help of someone who's just been an expert in this for so long. So I just wanted to make sure that we had this conversation together. I don't know much about it, but I'm sure you can lend a whole bunch of insights to this.
It's why I keep you around. You keep me fresh in the space. I appreciate you.
The reason I want to talk about this is that there is a new study that came out of a leadership institute in Pennsylvania that said that 40% of new leaders fail within the first 18 months. And I thought that's an interesting stat. It's not surprising at all. In fact, there's part of me thinks that I would have thought it'd be even higher than that. But whatever the reason, and there are a lot of reasons for this, these are leaders that are either newly promoted within an organization or they are hired in from the outside, but they are taking on a leadership role for the first time or taking on a leadership role of a new team for the first time. Maybe they've been a leader already, but now they're becoming a leader of leaders, but for whatever reason, they are either leaving the organization or leaving the role within the first 18 months. And that is incredibly expensive to do. Like if you're an organization and you are having to replace 40% of your leaders every 18 months, that is a very costly endeavor for the cost to recruit and to train. I think I read somewhere once that for an entry-level employee, it costs about half a year's compensation to replace an entry-level employee. For an entry-level leader, it costs about 1 to 1.5 times the annual salary. And for a senior leader, it costs anywhere between 2 and 4 times the cost of their compensation to replace them and get their replacement kind of up to speed. But yet it continues to happen regardless of the fact that it's very costly. And there are a lot of reasons for it.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I think of when I hear stats like that is like, well, how are we measuring that? How are we defining the word failure? Is this like, like they're not enroll 18 months later, that they've not seen the outcome success of what was expected? Those are the things that jump into my mind, because I think that I'm with you on this. I think that if you have a leader who is having a hard time getting the work done, or quote unquote kind of like they're failing to a degree, I don't think it takes 18 months. So I think that starts to happen much sooner than that, especially because of the expectation around people and people leadership and that type of thing. So, that's my first thought is like, well, where are we going with that, and how do we measure that? But I do think that there are a lot of times that I would see, and I know there's a lot of like thoughts around like, hire slow and kind of fire fast is kind of the idea that's put out there. And that whole idea is like, what happens when you have somebody that you place specifically in a leadership role and it's just not working out for whatever the reasons. And again, it's not, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things I'm sure that we're going to talk about in regards to this article and some of the topics or some of the reasons as to why. But I can see that happening. And I think a lot of times what I see is like the filters of what you're hiring for. I think a lot of times leaders that do hiring are thinking about the right now. What's the thing right now? And maybe they're not thinking about not just right now, but like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. They're not thinking about things like the impact to the team. If the team is the right people and they're doing the right work, and you're looking for a leader to kind of like help them move along faster or help them become better, that's a major decision to make that could have a very big impact on the team, positively or negatively.
Right. And I like what you said about it. It takes less than 18 months. I think it takes less than 18 months if the role is taken from them. So if a leader is failing from the standards of their boss or the organization, hopefully you have competent leadership in place above that person that can make those tough decisions and say, this just isn't working out. And that's about the whole, hire slow and fire fast. I completely agree with that. I think why it says in the first 18 months is I think it also takes into account people who kind of self-select out. This isn't just where the organization or their boss decides this role, we thought it was the right fit for you, but it's not. But there's a real element here of leaders kind of opting out after a certain amount of time because of what it's doing to them, how it's taking a toll on them emotionally or for their work-life balance, or just the feeling of having to keep up something and keep doing it for a long period of time. I can see how a newly promoted leader might have difficulties at the beginning, and then they kind of chalk it up to, okay, well, this is new to me. There's going to be a learning curve, but once I learn and I get my feet on the ground and everything's kind of in a rhythm, I'll be good. And if that doesn't happen after a year, if after a year of doing that you still feel like you are floundering, or that like you are dropping the ball on things, or that you are constantly feeling like you don't have the work-life balance that you want, or that you feel like you're having to put in twice as many hours as you think you should to get something done because it's just harder to do those things for you, I can see how that could lead to burnout and for leaders to kind of self-select out. So yes, that's why I think it goes up to 18 months like that. But if I look at some of the reasons in the article about why leaders fail, the ones that jump out to me are, it says that more than half fail to build teamwork with staff or peers. And then about a third are unclear about what their bosses expect. And then about a quarter don't have the required internal political savvy, or there's no process to assimilate new leaders into the role. And these all make sense. There are things that I have felt on my own as a newly promoted or recruited in leader in organizations. There's really no way to make them zero. The goal is to be able to learn as you go and get through it. But some of them, if they don't exist from the very beginning, that should be a sign that maybe there's a problem, a larger problem here. And if it's an organization that has a lot of turnover, maybe it's not your problem as the leader. Maybe it's an organizational problem. But if you seem to be the only one kind of struggling with these things, then it could be a you problem.
Yeah, it's a great perspective, because I think that there are definitely times where there are shifts in an industry, there's shifts in an organization. There may be a shift in direction or vision. You may have had a change at a much higher level that's having a much larger impact when it comes to the expectations of those leaders and what their day-to-day looks like. So there are definitely times when there's kind of like a collective of things that are happening that is making it very tough for new leaders to succeed. And then there's the time when it's just your leaders, like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of have to look at that and really look at the mirror and think about and understand what's going on there. And that could be, it just depends upon the impact, the influence that you have in the selection process. It could be in the developmental process. It could be in the approach to the work. And to your point around like the teamwork, the team building aspect, those are, it's such a interesting thing, because I think we're still a lot of times, organizations and kind of approaches to leadership / performance management organizations is somewhat antiquated in this idea that if you have a team that's not performing well, that the right leader can turn them around. Now, look, for a long time in my career, I've raised my hand to be that person. I'm like, let me do it. Like, not only do I think I can do it, but I can probably, and I should be able to do this with 90% of the same people, because of my approach to leadership and my belief of thinking about like not taking it personal and understanding that typically, leadership impact on teams is really what's going to either make them good or great or not performing. But that's not always the case. And that also requires a certain level of trust and space that my leader gives to me. Like I can operate in that way only because of leaders that I've had that have allowed me to do that. And if you don't have that in your environment, if you don't have the space to operate in a way that you feel strongly can move a team in that direction, it becomes significantly harder to take a low performing team or a disengaged team and make them want to kind of push forward.
Right. And I like what you said about you can do it with 90% of the same people, implying that yeah, sometimes some people have to go, but for the most part, people can be brought along for the journey if they have the right leader in place. And I agree with you, but I will say that the timeline of expectations from your boss will have a major impact on that. Meaning, if all of a sudden you feel like your bosses want the change to happen in 2 quarters versus 1 year, that can make a big difference between you being able to do it with 90% of the same people or 50% of the same people, because sometimes people take time to kind of get on board, especially if they've been burned before. Like if a person is disengaged and you assume positive intent, right? You go in and you assume that the reason why they're disengaged is because they haven't had the right leader. And if the entire team is low performing, then that makes sense. They haven't had the right leadership in place and you can re-engage them. That's great. But there are some people who are kind of beyond repair when it comes to the job, at least for that organization. Meaning the only way for that person to re-engage at all is to just be with a different organization. There's no way to really salvage it with the current one. But again, if you don't have the leeway from your boss to say, I can get this done, but it's going to take some time, and here are the benchmarks you can expect. But for you to have a team that goes from very low performing to high performing, that isn't an overnight thing. It takes time, because trust takes time. If for them to trust me as a new leader coming in, I need to have the time to build that trust. And trust can only be built through interactions. And trust can only be built from me telling them something and then them seeing that I'm going to follow through with what I said to them. And that doesn't happen on the first time. That happens on the 7th or 8th or 9th time that I've been able to hold to what I'm telling them. Then they can start to kind of open up a little bit and think, okay, maybe Lorenzo's different. Maybe I can trust this person. And then they start to re-engage again. That isn't an overnight thing. And if the leader who's newly promoted doesn't have the support from their bosses to make that happen, that can lead to real failure. But that assumes that the leader is a right fit for the job and that they don't have the support. There's a lot of these reasons that are happening here where it is not about their boss, it's about them. It's about them not having the skills to lead this team when they should have it, even in the face of having a supportive boss, even in the face of knowing what the expectations are. The number one answer being failure to build teamwork with staff and peers. That's more of a cultural fit, more of a personal kind of, do I mesh with the people I'm working alongside?
Yeah, and I think it's critical. So much of the work that leaders do, and whether you're a kind of a direct leader of people or even a project manager where you may not have direct reports, but you are definitely influencing getting people to do certain kinds of work, those relationships and that capability is such an important part of it. And it's now more so than ever. And I think that's probably one of the biggest differences is that, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you could not be necessarily liked, or the team could feel like you're not, approachable or connecting with them or inspiring them. But are you consistent? And are you fair in the fact that you're being a jerk to everybody?
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. And like, if you're those things, then you can actually get a lot of work done. And kind of in that era of leadership, that was not looked down upon. That was not a problem. Like that was like, nope, like, Chris treats everybody the same way that way. Chris is very clear and direct in his messaging. Chris, like he kind of works within this box. That's what he does. And so much of that has changed that now that relationship piece is so critical, that if you don't have great relationships with people, that bubbles itself to the top. And then it becomes that, like to your point, like that becomes a matter of like, well, I guess like Chris isn't just working out. Like it's not that his work is necessarily bad, or maybe like his team even got better to a degree with certain things, but like the vibe's not there. Overall, people, don't connect with him well, and that's not something that we want to have within our culture. And I think like those are things that are happening now, that may have happened in the past, but not nearly as much as what the expectation is from leaders today.
Right. Well, but let's be clear. It's not just that people would report, oh, this leader isn't meshing well, or they're, the numbers are there, but they just don't get along with them. In this day and age, if people don't get along with their leader, the numbers aren't going to be there, because people won't try. People won't work hard for a person that they don't like. And there will be a higher level of turnover and attrition. There'll be people who leave the organization to go elsewhere because they don't like their boss. And that changes obviously because it's significantly less of a negative mark to have 3 jobs in 5 years on your resume versus what it was 20 years ago. So none of these things impact a potential applicant or employees now. So that has rightfully so placed a lot of power and control into the hands of the employees. And it is making leaders have to change the way they interact with people and engage with people in order to get the best work out of them. Now, whether you want to say it's a good thing or a bad thing is all personal opinion here. But at the end of the day, the numbers are what matter. So if you as a leader are not producing the objectives that the company has asked you to produce, then that's not going to work out for you. And if you have a hard time doing that because you have a hard time building relationships with people, that's going to be more instantly reflective in those numbers than they were 20 years ago. The one about a third are unclear about what their bosses expect. I put that in terms of the whose responsibility that is. That is truly 50-50 on the employee and the boss. So if I'm unclear what my boss expects, the first thing I'm going to do is go to my boss and say, what do you expect? Now, what would stop me from doing that? Well, what would stop me from doing that is, the old, the Chris Pratt meme online, I have no idea what I'm doing here, and at this point I'm too afraid to ask. Yeah. If you wait long enough before finding out what the expectations are, then you might seem like you go to ask your boss what the expectations are, and the look on their face might be bewilderment because they might have thought that you would have asked a long time ago if you didn't know what the expectations were. And that's a very real thing. However, there's no better time than yesterday, but the second best time is now. And so if you don't know what the expectations are, you do need to ask. And if you don't feel comfortable asking your boss, then ask a peer. But figure out what the expectations are, because all you're doing is hurting yourself. And the only thing worse than a boss who thinks that you should have asked about expectations earlier is a boss who terminates you from the company because eventually they just realize you have no idea what expectations are. And so it's an imperative to find out what they are. And if they're not being upfront and clear with you about it, you need to be upfront and clear with them about it so that you can work together to get it done.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1-minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1-minute hack, here's what I want you to do. If you're a newly promoted leader, there are some questions you should be asking yourself, and we'll put the questions in the podcast description. But the first thing you want to ask yourself is, do you understand yourself and what drives you? Meaning, why is it that you wanted this role? Do you have the capabilities necessary to do this, or is it just another stepping stone for you? The other questions you want to ask are about the team itself. Do you have the right team members? And do you know what they expect of you? Do you have the ability to deliver the things that they're expecting of you? Answer these questions for yourself, and you'll be far more likely to be successful in the role. There are other things to consider too, but if you have that part in place, you actually want to be there, you believe you can do some good work there, and you know what your team expects of you and you think you can do it, that will eliminate the vast majority of potential of you failing in the new leadership role.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1-minute hack. And right off the bat, it's building some elements of trust and engagement and interaction with the team, and understanding that as their leader, you have a 2-part role. Like, you are there to help make sure the organization meets its objectives and exceeds those objectives. And also, you're there to serve your team and make sure they have whatever support they need to be able to do great work within the roles that they have. So it's really important that you think about these things, you write these things down, you consider them, and that way you've got some bookends to kind of bounce off of when you're trying to make decisions, or you're in situations where you're going to have to lean one way or the other. These will be helpful to making sure that you maintain some consistency with your team, and over time that consistency really builds a lot of trust with them.
Right, and like I said before, there are other factors to consider in terms of your leadership and cultural fit and clear expectations. But it's amazing how much those problems will seem significantly smaller if you have these basics in place. Do you actually want to be there? And do you know what your team expects of you? If you can get those things done, we've seen a huge sweeping change in what makes leaders successful over the last few years. And having the buy-in of their team goes so far to making things work that that you can take longer on the other things if your team wants you to be there and there's a good working relationship between you and your people.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.